There are undoubtedly experiences in life so exceedingly strange, so deeply preposterous, that one begins to narrate them in one's own mind, as if playing the main role in an implausible film. Such was my situation not long ago, as I stood in the murky pre-dawn ambience of my garage, the potent aroma of concrete and justified outrage permeating the atmosphere, observing the gradual, relentless ascent of the metallic door. And on the other side, it was not the tranquil suburban thoroughfare I anticipated, but the swiftly blanching countenance of Karen Ainsworth, HOA President Extraordinaire. Her hand was suspended in mid-reach for a key. My key for my garage, for my G Wagon. A key she had absolutely no right to possess. Rest assured, the narrative of how we arrived at that scene, with 10 of my most capable associates positioned shoulder to shoulder with me in the gloom, is truly remarkable. It is an account of minor despotism, daring overstepping of authority, and a form of vehicular fixation typically confined to cinematic heists, not serene cul-de-sacs. And it all commenced, as these chronicles of suburban conflict frequently do, with an incident so insignificant it is almost mortifying to relate. But Karen possessed a talent for transforming minor issues into volcanic crises, complete with stringent rules and compulsory timetables for trouble. I am a police officer, and have been for 15 years. I have witnessed a considerable amount of unusual behavior, contended with the illogical, the self-important, and the downright malicious. One cultivates a resilient exterior, a specific capacity to disregard provocations. It is a coping strategy. Yet, nothing in my professional development, nothing encountered on the streets, adequately readied me for the distinct variety of meticulously recorded, rule-enforcing egomania that characterized Karen Ainsworth. She was not merely an ordinary meddler. Oh no. Karen had refined community interference into a sophisticated practice, supported by the quasi-legitimate power of the Homeowners Association, which she brandished like a royal staff, or perhaps more fittingly, like an electrified goad. She resided 2 streets away in a dwelling that was marginally too large, painted a hue of beige that was slightly too ostentatious, and she operated a spotless, constantly buffed, older model Lexus sedan, the type that seems to communicate, "I hold views regarding your landscaping, and they are legally enforceable." Her clothing served as a kind of uniform. Costly in appearance, yet invariably somewhat discordant tracksuits in jewel tones, an array of gold-plated ornaments that jingled with each domineering movement, and oversized sunglasses set atop her impeccably coiffed blonde helmet of hair, even on gloomy days. She navigated our small enclave like a diminutive sovereign surveying her domain. A clipboard was her perpetual accessory, a thin-lipped expression of disapproval, her standard demeanor. My transgression, the original cause that ignited Karen's intense fury, was my G Wagon. Now, I cherish that vehicle. It's a formidable machine, a striking, unapologetically square piece of German engineering. Matte black, as steadfast as a boulder. I had put money aside for years, undertaken extra shifts, and it represented my achievement and contentment, my refuge from the daily routine. It was more than just an automobile. It was a symbol of accomplishment, a recompense for years dedicated to public service. And evidently, in Karen's perception, it was an insult. Perhaps it exceeded her preferences in size, or was too assertive for the tranquil, beige-infused serenity she pictured for our residential area. Or perhaps, and this is the hypothesis I favor, she simply desired it with a fervent, all-encompassing jealousy that festered into something genuinely unpleasant. The initial official assault arrived as a neatly printed infringement notice tucked beneath my windshield wiper. Improperly parked vehicle, it stated, referencing some little-known regulation concerning vehicles needing to be flawlessly aligned within the driveway markings with a precise and honestly unachievable distance from the ornamental stones bordering my lawn. I took measurements. I was misaligned by half an inch on one side. The penalty was $50. I remitted it, complaining under my breath, believing it to be an isolated incident, an especially strict enforcement of a foolish directive. Oh, how mistaken I was. That was merely the preliminary strike. Shortly, the notices became a consistent occurrence. My refuse containers were positioned 3 inches too near the roadside on collection day. A diminutive potted rosemary herb on my veranda was classified as unapproved flora. The hue of my doormat evidently conflicted with the community's visual standards, a set of rules I am certain Karen concocted during a delirious episode. Each breach incurred a penalty, a patronizing small message penned in her constricted, sharp handwriting, and frequently a low-resolution, magnified photograph as proof. I attempted to engage her in rational discussion. I went to an HOA meeting, a genuinely spirit-crushing affair, akin to observing paint dry while being methodically pecked by a gathering of exceptionally finicky birds. Karen presided, naturally, from a slightly raised seat, striking a diminutive gavel with excessive vigor. I calmly stated that the infractions were minor, that I was a conscientious homeowner, and that surely the HOA had more significant matters to address. She listened, her expression a veneer of courteous indifference, then apprised me with a cloying smile that did not reflect in her eyes, that rules are rules, Officer Miller, and no one is exempt, particularly not those who ought to be exemplary. The thinly disguised criticism of my occupation was not lost on me. The remaining board members, a group of timid-appearing senior citizens and one notably anxious individual who seemed to flinch each time Karen spoke loudly, simply affirmed her statements, their gazes shifting uneasily between Karen and the ground. It was evident who was in charge. Her spouse, a perpetually perplexed-looking gentleman named Barry, occasionally attended, appearing as if he would prefer to be anywhere else on the planet, sometimes offering a feeble, conciliatory smile if Karen directed her gaze his way. He was, I surmised, her chief enabler, having been intimidated into compliance many years prior. The G Wagon, however, persisted as her foremost preoccupation. She would offer remarks if she observed me cleaning it. Quite the fuel consumer, is it not? Not very ecologically sound for our little verdant sanctuary. Or, it must be pleasant to permit oneself such showy possessions. This, from an individual whose own Lexus likely had not experienced a car wash that wasn't a meticulous hand detailing on a weekly basis. I would merely smile, acknowledge, and resume polishing, but I began to observe her vehicle driving slowly past my residence more frequently than typical, her head turning, those sunglasses reflecting light. It was disquieting. It was during this period, following an especially preposterous citation for unapproved window reflection from my G Wagon's windshield. I am not joking, that I opted to enhance my home's security. I possessed a fundamental system already, but I procured a pair of new high-resolution cameras equipped with night vision and, critically, superior audio recording features. One was aimed to provide an unobstructed view of my driveway and garage entrance, while another monitored the side approach. I reasoned that if Karen intended to intensify her campaign of minor provocations, I desired a definitive record of it. Little did I suspect that this choice, prompted by slight irritation and a yearning for tranquility, would shortly become the central element of an operation exposing a degree of illicit activity I would never have anticipated from the self-styled monarch of cul-de-sac order. The circumstances were developing. The individuals involved were taking their places. And Karen, entirely unsuspecting, was on the verge of elevating her fixation to an altogether new and, frankly, alarming degree. The peaceful rhythm of suburban existence was about to be disrupted by the jarring sound of ambition clashing directly with the immovable bulwark of the law. All on account of a matte black G Wagon and a woman who simply could not tolerate not achieving her desires. The barrage of minor infractions persisted, each notice progressively stranger, increasingly personal. One morning, I discovered a violation for excessive tire shine on the G Wagon, asserting it produced a dangerously reflective surface. I recall staring at that document, the official-looking HOA letterhead in stark juxtaposition with the sheer absurdity of the charge. And I genuinely chuckled. It was either that or begin shouting. But the amusement was fleeting, because beneath the ridiculousness lay an undercurrent of authentic ill will, a persistent, obsessive attention that was beginning to feel less like trivial HOA disagreements and more like deliberate persecution. I systematically recorded everything. Every communication, every penalty, every subtly hostile remark Karen uttered if we happened to meet. I maintained a detailed account, captured photographs, and retained duplicates. My professional instincts took over. Should this situation escalate beyond simple irritation, I was determined to possess a clear, irrefutable documentation of her conduct. My associates at the station found it grimly humorous. "You've got a real character on your hands there, Miller," my partner Dave remarked with a laugh when I described the tire shine episode. "Perhaps she wants to borrow it for an exciting evening with Barry." We jested about it, yet even then, a subtle sense of disquiet pricked at me. Her obsession was simply abnormal, even for the most domineering HOA president. Then the incident with the garage lock occurred. I had returned home from an extended late duty, utterly exhausted, anticipating nothing more than collapsing into bed. I maneuvered into the driveway, pressed the remote for the garage door, and there was no response. I attempted again. Still nothing. The small green indicator on the remote was flashing, signaling it was transmitting, but the door remained resolutely closed. Perplexed and annoyed, I exited the vehicle, approached the manual keypad, and entered my code. Access denied. What on earth? I inserted my key into the manual override lock on the door itself. It refused to rotate. It felt as if it encountered an obstruction, or as though the tumblers were entirely incorrect. A knot formed in my stomach. This was not a simple mechanical issue. The lock felt altered. I shone my phone's flashlight upon it. It appeared superficially the same, but it lacked the subtle signs of wear characteristic of my lock. It seemed newer or at least recently manipulated. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had replaced my garage door lock. My thoughts immediately turned to Karen. It was too precise, too focused, too consistent with her escalating actions against me, and by extension my G Wagon, which was, I hoped, securely on the other side of that door. I contacted a 24-hour locksmith, an individual I knew somewhat from some part-time security engagements. He arrived within an hour, appearing tired but maintaining a professional demeanor. "Looks like someone replaced the cylinder, friend," he commented after several minutes of inspection. "Neat work, too. No force applied. They either possessed a key for the original to extract it, or they knew how to pick it without causing harm, then fitted a new one." He succeeded in gaining entry for me and subsequently substituted the tampered lock with a robust, high-security model, providing me with the sole set of keys. As the garage door finally rumbled upwards, my G Wagon was there, untouched, reflecting light under the stark fluorescent illumination. A sensation of relief enveloped me, swiftly succeeded by an upwelling of intense, cold anger. This was no longer a matter of trivial penalties or infractions against aesthetic standards. This constituted breaking and entering, meddling with my possessions, a grave criminal offense. Karen, or an individual acting under her direction, had transgressed a significant boundary. The $50 penalty for being half an inch off in my parking now felt like a remote, almost quaint, recollection. This was conflict. The very following day, I ensured my security cameras were impeccably aimed with fresh batteries, cleared memory cards, and optimized audio recording settings. I felt as though I were bracing for an assault. I had a strong intuition, the type of police instinct that seldom misguides, that this was not the conclusion. Whoever altered that lock was not doing so merely for amusement. They had an objective. And considering Karen's unyielding focus on my G Wagon, I had a dreadful inkling as to what that objective might be. I mentally reviewed every exchange with her, every sarcastic remark, every prolonged gaze at my vehicle. Had she been acquiring information, assessing my routine? It all seemed incredibly deliberate. The notion that she, the paragon of community virtue, the guardian of the sacrosanct regulations, could be capable of such an act was still astounding. Yet, the evidence of the replaced lock was indisputable. The sheer audacity was stunning. She had not merely provoked a dangerous entity, she had invaded its sanctuary and attempted to alter its surroundings. It was 2 days thereafter, while I was at the station completing administrative tasks, that my phone vibrated with an alert from my security application, movement detected. Driveway camera. My pulse quickened perceptibly. I accessed it and the live image filled my display. There she was, Karen Ainsworth, in her full, garish turquoise tracksuit ensemble, striding back and forth at the extremity of my driveway, phone pressed to her ear. She was too distant for the camera's microphone to capture her portion of the dialogue distinctly, but her agitated movements, the manner in which she persistently glanced toward my garage, were highly revealing. I promptly switched to the recorded material from a few minutes prior, the segment that had activated the notification. The camera had documented her approach, walking with intent to the boundary of my property, then pausing as if abruptly recalling the presence of surveillance. She was more astute than I had initially thought, or perhaps merely sufficiently cautious. But then came the critical discovery. The camera I had placed near an ornamental bush, aimed slightly toward the street and my driveway, possessed superior audio reception for sounds emanating from that vicinity. And Karen, during her pacing, had wandered directly into its ideal recording area. I initiated playback of that segment, holding my breath. Her voice, sharp and infused with a self-satisfied triumph, was transmitted loudly and distinctly. She was not conversing with her perplexed Barry. Not on this occasion. The manner was conspiratorial, professional. Yes, the locksmith was completely fooled. Believed every word of that emergency eviction repossession narrative. Honestly, a bit of official-looking HOA letterhead and individuals will accept anything. He even provided me the master key to the new lock he fitted. Said Miller probably just misplaced his original, or it was jamming. The imbecile. A cold sensation settled in my stomach. So that was her method. Deception, misrepresentation. She was exulting. He'll be on duty tonight. His usual late shift. Henderson's boy Ricky, he mentioned he can bypass the ignition of anything on wheels, but we won't even require that. I possess the key. We simply unlock the door, maneuver it out. I've already located a storage facility far out in an industrial zone. Anonymous lease. Cash transaction. By the time Officer Miller even notices his prize truck is missing, it will be impossible to trace. And then her voice lowered, taking on a poisonous quality. We'll see who acts so superior. That hideous vehicle does not belong in my community. I'll submit a report stating it was found abandoned on HOA common land after being taken for a joyride, then appropriate it for the association. Or perhaps I'll just ensure it vanishes for good. A vehicle like that, the untraceable components alone are extremely valuable. My jaw clenched. This was no longer merely about community aesthetics. This was Grand Theft Auto, meticulously orchestrated with an associate motivated by unadulterated, malicious avarice and an astounding degree of self-importance. She indicated the time, approximately 2 a.m., when the streets would be empty, when she presumed I would be far away, completely oblivious. She was so self-assured, so thoroughly persuaded of her own immunity. She had no inkling that the individual she was scheming to defraud was presently hearing her every incriminating utterance, a grim smile forming on his face. The snare was about to be laid, and Karen Ainsworth, HOA president and would-be car thief, was poised to walk directly into it. The undertaking, as it is said, was in motion, and I had several acquaintances whom I knew would be keenly interested in participating. The recording concluded, and I remained seated in the sterile confines of the precinct, the drone of the computers a stark juxtaposition to the seething anger and, I confess, a spark of grim eagerness coursing through me. Karen Ainsworth, the self-designated protector of suburban decorum, was orchestrating a felony, a grave one, and she was executing it with such astounding presumption, such absolute belief in her own immunity from consequences. The Henderson boy, Ricky, whom she named, I was acquainted with him. A young man in his early 20s, with a couple of prior minor offenses for joyriding and petty larceny. Not a criminal prodigy, but impressionable, likely gratified by attention from someone like Karen. Or perhaps she held some sway over him or his family via the HOA. This was not merely Karen experiencing a fleeting error in judgment. This constituted a deliberate plot. My intellect, honed by years in law enforcement, instantly began to systematically arrange the proof. The altered lock, the locksmith she had deceived. Her own recorded statements outlining the scheme. The Confederate. This was substantial. More than substantial. This was a prosecutor's ideal scenario. My initial communication was to Dave, my colleague. Dave, I began, my voice kept low and steady. You will not credit what our esteemed HOA president has planned for this evening. I played the audio segment for him over the telephone. A period of stunned quiet ensued, followed by a soft whistle. Miller, you cannot be serious. She actually uttered all of that. The G Wagon. Has she lost her senses entirely? His preliminary disbelief swiftly transitioned into the same professional concentration I was experiencing. All right, he stated, his tone now entirely businesslike. What is our strategy? Do you want us to surveil your residence? That was precisely my intention. However, this required careful by-the-book management. We could not undertake this unofficially. I needed formal approval, a correctly formulated operational outline, regardless of its modest scope. I proceeded down the corridor to Lieutenant Davies' office. Davies was a traditionalist, had witnessed everything, and possessed a keenly developed ability to detect absurdity, but also a profound commitment to justice. I presented the entire situation to him, the history of provocations, the escalation involving the lock, and ultimately the recording. I played it for his benefit. He listened with concentration, his facial expression initially inscrutable, then gradually shifting to a sort of amazed incredulity, finally hardening into a severe frown. He leaned backward in his chair, stroking his chin. Ainsworth, he reflected. I recognize that name. My sister-in-law resides in your housing development. Constantly complains about that HOA. Refers to the president as Queen Karen. He regarded me. She is planning grand theft auto, conspiracy, and who knows what else. And she's utilizing HOA letterhead to perpetrate fraud. This is remarkably foolish. I intend to arrange a welcoming party, Lieutenant, I stated, inside my garage. When she employs that unlawfully acquired key to open the door, I want her to encounter us. Davies nodded deliberately, clear, irrefutable, apprehended in the commission of the act. I approve, but we execute this correctly. No recklessness. You will take the lead, Miller. It is your investigation, your residence. However, I want Sergeant Rohr and his tactical unit with you. Not because I anticipate an armed confrontation over a G Wagon with an HOA president, but because I desire an overwhelming display of force, no uncertainty, and complete command of the circumstances. 10 officers in civilian attire, concealed, will liaise with dispatch. Inform them of a clandestine operation at your location, so no well-intentioned patrol vehicle inadvertently interferes. He paused. And Miller, you are to preserve professional decorum. This is a personal matter for you, I understand. But tonight, you are Officer Miller directing an operation. Allow her to ensnare herself with her own actions, or in this instance, her own key. His pronouncements served as a steadying influence. He was correct. Personal gratification would follow, but the foremost concern was an impeccable arrest, an unassailable case. We dedicated the subsequent few hours to arranging the particulars, which officers, their entry routes into my house unseen. Fortunately, I had a rear gate and an infrequently used side entrance to the kitchen. Placement within the garage, communication procedures, and alternative plans should she arrive with more than just young Ricky Henderson. We even deliberated on the most suitable charges. Attempted grand theft auto, conspiracy to commit grand theft auto, breaking and entering, or more accurately, unlawful entry, given her possession of a key, albeit obtained through deception, and potentially fraud for the deceit involving the locksmith. The legal distinctions were crucial. As dusk neared, a peculiar tranquility enveloped me. The resentment persisted, simmering beneath the exterior, yet it was tempered by a cold, distinct sense of resolve. This was no longer solely about my G Wagon. It concerned apprehending an individual who considered herself beyond the reach of the law, one who employed her minor authority to harass and intimidate, and who was now progressing to grave criminal conduct. This was for every dweller who had ever been subjected to Karen's oppressive rule. Every nonsensical penalty, every disdainful comment. Tonight, the self-styled monarch was about to discover her dominion was founded on instability. My associates started to arrive unobtrusively as night descended. Dave was the first, followed by Rohr with his unit, reliable, trustworthy individuals with whom I had collaborated on numerous more challenging assignments than this. A quiet professionalism and mutual comprehension pervaded. We entered the garage via the internal access door from the house. The G Wagon stood there, a silent, matte black monolith, the unwitting focus of the evening's events. We arranged ourselves strategically, concealed from the windows, guaranteeing that when the garage door ascended, the initial sight for anyone peering inside would be a phalanx of exceedingly stern-looking police officers. We were equipped with low-visibility tactical apparatus, nothing overt, but sufficient to convey the message. We verified our communication systems. Silence. Then the period of waiting commenced. The hours passed with excruciating deliberation. 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m. The atmosphere in the garage was cool, heavy with suspense. We communicated in muted tones, if at all. Each creak of the house settling, every distant sound of a vehicle, heightened our tension. Had she become alarmed, altered her intentions? My thoughts explored various scenarios. Perhaps Ricky Henderson had lost his nerve. Perhaps Karen had experienced an abrupt, uncharacteristic surge of practical thinking. I kept my gaze fastened on the sliver of illumination beneath the garage door, listening intently. Then, at exactly 1:58 a.m., I detected it. The slight sound of gravel shifting on my driveway. Not a vehicle engine, but footsteps, soft, surreptitious, attempting to be silent. My heart pounded against my chest. I gave a nonverbal signal to the team. Everyone became alert, prepared. More footsteps, nearer now, directly outside the garage door. A faint metallic click, the sound of a key entering a lock. My lock, the lock she had installed. The sheer impudence still astounded me. There was a brief halt, then the clear sound of the lock's tumblers rotating, a gentle thud as it released. Another pause. I could almost perceive her holding her breath on the other side, likely relishing her moment of apparent success. And then the quiet whir of the garage door motor activating. The lower edge of the door rose, inch by agonizing inch, initially revealing a pair of costly, vividly hued athletic shoes, then the hem of a recognizable turquoise tracksuit. The conditions were perfect. It was time for action. The garage door ascended, a deliberate, theatrical unveiling for our modest stage of retribution. And there she was, Karen Ainsworth, lit by the dim radiance of a streetlight seeping in, a victorious, almost rapacious smirk upon her face. In her grasp, clutched like a prize, was the key. Beside her, appearing anxious and furtive, stood a slender young man I immediately identified as Ricky Henderson. His eyes wide and shifting about as if anticipating difficulty, which, in a splendid turn of events, he was about to encounter profusely. Karen advanced a step, her attention riveted on the polished black form of my G Wagon, her smirk expanding. "There it is, Ricky," she murmured, her voice a hushed, conspiratorial whisper, yet audible enough for us to discern clearly in the abrupt quiet. "Even more unsightly up close, but it will command a significant price. Or at least its disappearance will afford me considerable pleasure." She lifted the remote for the G Wagon, presumably a universal device Ricky had supplied, or perhaps she had even managed to acquire one of mine during a prior undetected entry. Her finger paused over the unlock command. That was the definitive action we required. "Good evening, Karen," I stated, my voice composed, breaking the stillness. I emerged from the shadows, my colleagues deploying silently beside and behind me, a formidable array of stern-faced officers. The impact was immediate and profoundly satisfying. Karen halted mid-stride, her hands twitching, the remote falling with a clatter to the concrete surface. Her eyes, wide with astonishment, darted from me to the 10 other individuals now distinctly apparent in the dim illumination. The triumphant smirk disappeared, supplanted by a slack-jawed horror that was nearly humorous had the circumstances not been so grave. Ricky Henderson appeared on the verge of collapsing or fleeing, his previous audacity vanishing like vapor. What? Officer Miller?" Karen faltered, her voice a pitiful, high-pitched sound. The majestic self-assurance, the domineering manner, all had vanished. She seemed diminished, deflated, her turquoise tracksuit suddenly appearing garish and inferior under the conditions. "What are you doing here? This is a misunderstanding." "I do not believe so, Karen," I responded, maintaining an even tone. "This is my garage. That is my G Wagon. And this," I indicated the officers surrounding me, "is a police operation. You are trespassing, in possession of a key to my property which you acquired fraudulently and, by your own admission moments ago, are here to steal my vehicle." Her countenance underwent a captivating sequence of expressions. Incredulity, dawning realization of horror, and then a brief resurgence of her former arrogance. I am the HOA president. I was performing an inspection. There were allegations of unapproved vehicle storage. It was a feeble, frantic excuse, and she was aware of it. Ricky, in the meantime, had prudently lifted his hands and was gradually retreating, appearing thoroughly vanquished. An inspection, Karen? At 2 a.m, with a key you obtained by deceiving a locksmith? And accompanied by young Mr. Henderson here, who, I understand, possesses some familiarity with relocating vehicles. I allowed the silence to linger for a moment. Dave stepped forward, displaying his badge. Ma'am, Mr. Henderson, you are both being held on suspicion of conspiracy to commit grand theft auto, attempted grand theft auto, and unlawful entry. I would recommend you exercise your right to remain silent. Karen's eyes darted frantically, seeking an escape, an alibi, anything. You cannot do this. I am aware of my rights. This is persecution. Barry, where is Barry? He will corroborate my story, as if her subdued husband could somehow magically make 10 police officers vanish. We have your conversation recorded. Karen, I stated, my voice gentle yet resolute, the one in which you outlined your entire scheme, how you defrauded the locksmith, how you intended to take my G Wagon, conceal it, and then either sell it for parts or fraudulently claim it for the HOA. Every single word. The color completely vanished from her face. She appeared as if she had been struck forcefully in the stomach. The resistance drained from her. She slumped, her shoulders drooping. Ricky Henderson, to his credit, merely mumbled, "I want a lawyer," which was the most sensible thing he had uttered all evening. The sound of handcuffs clicking was surprisingly gratifying in the stillness of my garage. As Dave and another officer restrained Karen, she began to shiver, tears forming in her eyes. Not tears of contrition, I surmised, but tears of self-commiseration from a narcissist whose meticulously built reality had just disintegrated. You entrapped me?" she cried out, gazing at me with unadulterated malice. "I did nothing, Karen," I answered, my voice devoid of any sentiment save perhaps a weary sense of closure. "You brought all of this upon yourself. You replaced my locks. You schemed to purloin my vehicle. We simply chose to be present to observe your grand undertaking." The spectacle of Karen Ainsworth, HOA president, resplendent in her turquoise tracksuit and designer athletic shoes, being escorted from my garage in handcuffs was an image I would treasure for a very long time. The suburban monarch had been overthrown, not by a competing HOA group, but by her own monumental self-importance and a G Wagon she simply found irresistible. Several neighbors, awakened by the quiet proficiency of our exit, we had, of course, not employed sirens, were observing from their windows, their expressions marked by disbelief. The dominion of Karen was definitively concluded. The circumstances at the precinct were entirely predictable. Karen Ainsworth, divested of her majestic HOA demeanor and the clout of her clipboard, was in disarray. The booking procedure was interspersed with her indignant protests, her insistence on speaking with the mayor, the chief of police, anyone who would heed her narrative of misfortune and supposed unfairness. She appeared genuinely perplexed that the regulations, the actual ones, not her capricious HOA directives, indeed pertained to her. "Do you not realize who I am?" she persistently reiterated, as if her self-ascribed position as a neighborhood authority figure afforded her diplomatic immunity from felony accusations. The officers on duty, the majority of whom had heard rumors of Queen Karen and her governance in our development, treated her with professional impartiality, which only seemed to exacerbate her fury. Ricky Henderson, conversely, was subdued and compliant once isolated from Karen, swiftly comprehending the severity of his predicament and apparently keen to lessen his own culpability by disclosing the truth. He affirmed that Karen was the instigator, that she had contacted him, praised him, and proposed a share of the anticipated proceeds from the G Wagon sale. He even conceded she had instructed him on how to circumvent the vehicle's security system if the key fob malfunctioned, though he maintained he was merely present to assist her in moving it and had not grasped the full scope of her unlawful plans until events escalated in my garage. A dubious account, but his cooperation would likely result in some clemency later on. The legal mechanisms commenced operation almost at once. Karen was indicted for attempted grand theft auto, conspiracy to commit grand theft auto, unlawful entry, and felony fraud related to her deception of the locksmith. The proof was conclusive. My sworn statement, the locksmith's testimony. He was appalled to discover how he had been misled and was exceedingly willing to assist. Ricky Henderson's admission, and naturally, the piece de resistance. The perfectly clear audio recording of Karen herself, describing her criminal scheme with smug contentment. Her perpetually bewildered husband, Barry, appeared at the station resembling a disoriented small dog, wringing his hands and offering mumbled apologies on her behalf. He seemed genuinely unaware of the extent of her criminal designs, although one had to question the degree of deliberate naivety necessary to reside with someone like Karen and not perceive the cautionary signals. He paid her bail, which was considerable, and she departed the station with as much composure as she could gather, which was minimal, her face a storm cloud of rage and shame. Information regarding the HOA president's arrest circulated through our community with incredible speed. My telephone did not cease ringing for days. Neighbors with whom I had previously had minimal contact called to convey their astonishment, their encouragement, and in numerous instances, their profound relief. It transpired that Karen's period of minor despotism had been significantly more extensive and deeply disliked than I had understood. Accounts surfaced of exorbitant penalties for insignificant breaches, of vengeful enforcement against anyone who ventured to dispute her power, and of HOA finances being handled with a notable absence of openness. It appeared my G Wagon incident was merely the visible portion of a larger issue. The HOA board, lacking its detained president, called an urgent session. The timid members, formerly subdued by Karen's strict control, suddenly regained their assertiveness. A tangible feeling of emancipation filled the room. Within a single week, Karen Ainsworth was officially dismissed as HOA president, her nameplate unceremoniously taken from the community center entrance. The board extended a formal apology to me and to the wider community, vowing a comprehensive reevaluation of all current regulations and enforcement practices. They even nullified several of Karen's more absurd, outstanding penalties levied against other residents. It resembled a governmental overthrow, though on a very modest suburban level. The legal proceedings for Karen advanced slowly but surely. Her high-priced attorney attempted every available maneuver. Motions to exclude the recording were rejected, as it was my property, and she had no reasonable expectation of privacy while planning a crime against me. Assertions of entrapment were risible, as we merely permitted her to execute her own clearly articulated plans. Even efforts to depict her as an emotionally unstable individual driven to extremes by, well, they never quite determined by what. Ultimately, confronted with the overwhelming body of evidence, Karen Ainsworth entered a guilty plea to reduce charges of attempted theft and fraud to sidestep a protracted trial and an almost certain conviction on all accusations. She was given a substantial monetary penalty, a lengthy term of probation, compulsory community service, the irony of which was apparent to everyone, and a restraining order forbidding her from approaching me or my residence. The Henderson boy, Ricky, received probation and a serious caution, primarily owing to his cooperation and his youth. Life in the neighborhood improved. The new HOA board, composed of genuinely well-intentioned residents, implemented a significantly more sensible and cooperative methodology. The era of beige uniformity and trivial bylaw enforcement concluded. Residents began planting vibrant flowers once more. Children occasionally left their bicycles on their lawns, and a feeling of relaxed communal harmony started to reemerge. My G Wagon, now a local icon, stayed securely in my garage, a silent monument to the entire peculiar event. Occasionally, I would catch sight of Karen from afar, perhaps at the neighborhood grocery store. She appeared diminished, divested of her authority and her self-importance. The costly tracksuits were supplanted by more understated clothing. The perpetually present sunglasses failed to conceal the resentment in her eyes. She consistently avoided eye contact. Thus, that is the account of how our HOA Karen, propelled by a harmful mix of jealousy and a sense of privilege, endeavored to purloin my G Wagon and instead found herself confronting a garage filled with police officers rather than an effortless escape. It serves as a potent illustration that authority, even the minor authority of an HOA presidency, has the potential to corrupt, and that misjudging the unassuming, law-abiding individual down the road can lead to rather dramatic repercussions, particularly when that individual possesses a talent for gathering proof and a few reliable allies in law enforcement.